Further narratives on pandemic management into this post-COVID era, as it's being observed that although there are scarcity of money and I am suffering from financial crisis, I worked tirelessly throughout the years with scientific endeavor for research and development-based reporting. I am suffering because I haven't yet received payment for it. I had explored the pros and cons related with the globally observed health disaster coined as pandemic for the first time ever, instead of terming it as usual as endemic, as termed by World Health Organizations. References of details are available on the digital media. You could explore the things also. There were havoc caused by the declaration of the deadliest ever proclaimed health disaster. The sequence of incidents were as follows. As corona pandemic was declared, Janta curfew was imposed, lockdown was declared, unlock was declared in phased manner. PPE kits, personal protection equipment kits, and vaccines were developed and administered after clinical trials, and there were related competition for its production and supply, and initiatives were taken so that we can meet up with the emerging demands of the relevant health care equipments. Then massive vaccination drive were organized. Rations were availed to the people on recurring basis throughout the years. Short stay isolation shelters were sheltered and migrants were quarantined before their inclusion into the native place of their immunity, native community of their immigration. Then regular updates were broadcasted by Press Information Bureau on update status of public health related statistics of infection, recovery and losses. Then 75th and 76th General Assembly of United Nations was organized digitally under the tenure of Volkan Bozgir and Abdullah Sahid. There were violent armed clash in Galma Valley. There were wars between countries. Antonio Guterres was re-elected as the Secretary General of the United Nations for the second term. There were political leadership change in several countries. Supreme Court of India passed historic judgment for construction of Ram Mandir. Climate change was recognized among the prime causes for mutation and development of new strains of viruses. There were observed contradiction of obedience of community behavior at ground realities and broadcasted health prescriptions. Like what kind of health prescriptions was broadcasted and how community was responding in this manner. Then recently, World Health Organization Director General Dr. Tedros referred about Ebola, that there are Ebola probabilities of Ebola outbreaks, and yesterday night with the news broadcast mentions that there are also outbreak of cholera and other diseases. So there are factors associated with its regulation, monitoring and management, as WHO recommended to adhere with healthcare and nutrition care guidelines while observing the FIFA football games. There are testimonies published on YouTube about probabilities of environmental weather change as evident justification of the occurrence of climate change. Then COP26 was organized at Glasgow and global leaders expressed their solidarity for climate finance. World Health Organization partnership with Commonwealth and financial institutions to establish global pandemic preparedness and information management hub, so that valuable informations across the continents could be exchanged and could be analyzed for further planning and program implementation. And the proposed hub was out to be established in European Union countries. Then World Health Organization partnered with Government of India to expand healthcare research and development. BRICS, Quad, G20, Munich Security Council, ASEAN, COP27 as Sharm el Sheikh, Egypt, and a special emergency session of the UNGA were historic benchmarks for revival and strengthening the struggling global economy. Festival sessions were organized in 2021 and 2022 normally, but it was abandoned in 2020 due to the seriousness of the health emergency. Elections were held properly in several states, and election campaign is being organized with greater zeal and enthusiastic participation of community in Delhi, and community gathering could be observed through video footages available on media. There were deadlier flood disaster and food scarcity as global supply chain was struggled, and our neighboring country Pakistan also struggled the same, and there were excessive flood in the Horn of Africa as it was reported by Honorable Secretary General. However, we have survived of the deadliest ever observed disaster. We were harshly affected. We will overcome in solidarity with unity. These are the positive aspirations. Like we are simple human beings, our capacity is limited, and our optimism and faith guides our intellect. I went alone on religious pilgrimage barefoot in 2021 from Delhi to Hyderabad because I was disappointed with the struggling context of my life, as well as the circumstance appeared due to this pandemic were also harnessing, and it was a kind of like a restrictive barrier imposed by person for the safety and well-being of the individual by himself. Then I resumed my efforts to inquire and document my findings, which I have been submitting to the PMO, UN, and World Health Organization. Although I am exhausted and tired of the occupational stress, I maintain optimism that my contributions would be acknowledged and I will receive recognition, rewards, and payments. 28 November 2022, as post-pandemic assessment report with reference to the resumption of the interstate bus transportation and migration of laborers. As I wrote some report in this regard, which I would like to share now. Like it was an interaction with local resource persons to understand their insight about the functioning of the local bus depot for Himachal Pradesh in Delhi near Amna Biodiversity Park today. And yesterday I went there. I was visiting to the Mr. Ravindra Chaudhary, who works at Yamuna Biodiversity Park in the last quarter of 2019, regarding coaching establishment and book publications. I had good exchange of care and belongingness with a retail shop owner Arjun also. We have also discussed about annual pattern of migration of Siberian birds to the park those days. When there were lockdown, I was also feared. We met after long time. I think like it's been 2 years since we haven't yet met, and I went there and discussed about the context and changes that took place into their life during this period. They shared their care and concerns about the same thing and the changes which they were observing. During discussion yesterday, they shared their observation about operation of the bus depot as, however, interstate bus operation are resumed, but migrants, unorganized laborers haven't yet returned as they were arriving before this health disaster. Hopefully, for the sake of their livelihood and accessibility of local employment to their native place of immigration state, baseline survey could have been conducted by respective state government. Rehabilitative economic settlements initiatives could have been incorporated into the policy making. Housing construction activities at few places were going on. There were normal footfall of the people on the pedestrians, but almost none were wearing masks. But news broadcast, as I have seen yesterday about the China protest, people were wearing face masks even if they were gathering into the people. Election campaigns were going on for local election. I observed the commencement of the 2 or 3 marriage ceremonies on the way of my transit work also, with gathering of the peoples. During telephonic interaction with the person introduced himself as I talked with my mother yesterday. She said that her daughter Chanchala Mishra died. She was sharing her grief and suffering due to the loss of her daughter. I had went to my native village Mohanpura to participate in the religious rituals which was performed for salvation of the died soul posthumously. When I returned back from my village back to the Delhi, there were news broadcasts regarding propagation of new mutant strains of SARS-CoV-2 in western coastal states. Russian President Putin had visited India on 6th of December 2022. Antonio Guterres tweets today in the context of implementation of the Biological Weapon Convention are very relevant to this. It reads as follows: as the world gathers to review the Biological Weapon Convention, I call on leaders to ensure that science and technology are used for the benefit of humanity. Further, he mentioned that strengthening this disarmament treaty with the financial and human resource is more required. Like strengthening this disarmament treaty with the financial and human resource it needs is more important than ever. Another tweets resembles the same context as UN Geneva tweets. Since the start of COVID 19, 45% of women reported that they are a woman they know has experienced a form of violence, according to UNFPA. Violence against women and women remains the most widespread pervasive human rights violation in the world. The tweet reads as follows: then Council of Foreign Affairs, Delhi News Briefing. Um, there are some findings about the same, like top of the agenda. It mentions on top of the agenda, like outrage over COVID-19 restrictions prompt rare protest in China. Tens of thousands of people joined demonstrations in at least 10 cities across China over the weekends, at times clashing with security forces. In addition to objecting to harsh restrictions under the country's zero COVID policy, many protesters denounced limitations on freedom of speech, and some called for Chinese President Xi Jinping to step down. The protests were sparked by a deadly fire in a lockdown area of the Xinjiang region on Friday. Demonstrators marched in urban centers and at universities, and today police patrolled areas of Beijing and Shanghai where the demonstrations occurred. Authorities eased some pandemic restrictions in Beijing and Guangzhou today, but didn't mention the demonstrations. Analysis expressed that a heavy-handed response from authorities like risk creating martyrs, fueling another wave and giving a rallying cry to the protesters that have already come out. Yonsei University's John Dulles tells the Financial Times. Like the protests are the most severe test for Xi since taking power, and at a complex time, domestically and geopolitically, the Chinese Communist Party is stuck, having stuck the authorities on zero COVID. It find it impossible to take only sensible route out, namely importing mRNA vaccines. The International Institutions for Strategic Studies, James Capti tweets, for Foreign Affairs, CFR's Yang Jong Hong discussed how Beijing's harsh COVID-19 measures risk undermine its hold on power. But the reflections with reference to the observation of COVID-19 expresses that, like the climatic zone of China, as it hails in that humid region, there are related factors for change of the body physiology response mechanism, that how it responds during winter seasons. There might be appearance of symptomatic illness due to the common cough and cold and flu they are gathering, but the community participation expresses their commitment and solidarity that they abide by the precautions and prescriptions broadcasted by World Health Organization for safety and healthcare. UN brief by Mr. Stephen Jurek highlights on following developments, as it could be observed that like biological weapon convention, Ethiopia, Ukraine, and other topics are being considered sincerely into the ongoing sessions of the United Nations. As you mentioned, like on ninth Biological Weapon Conventions Review Conference, which is taking place in Geneva in Switzerland, he reminded participants that 50 years ago the global community stood as one and declared that the deliberate use of disease as a weapon was an affront to humanity, that it should be abolished, it should not be practiced, and there should be ban on as such use of bioweapons. You may find other relevant highlights like biological weapon conventions, Ethiopia, Ukraine, Central African Republic, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Middle East, Venezuela, Malawi, HIV, children and adolescent, and known guest on today. You can look after all the news broadcast on the relevant link as described here. So things are essential that need to be observed sincerely so that we can calibrate our thinking in our observation pattern, that how initiatives are being taken for enforcement of the humanitarian measures, so that the disturbance caused by the global pandemic and its related impact on the life of the people could be minimized, and they could be facilitated with relevant support system so that they can resume their normal lifestyles. These are the progressive reports related with finding on pandemic.